Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom. Welcome, everybody, to another episode from En Route Books and Media and from Ronda Chervin's personal journal on which this show will be posted. My name is Sebastian Mahfood, the publisher at En Route Books and the producer at WCAT Radio. And I have with me here Ronda Chervin and Albert Hughes, the authors of What Now? A Roadmap for 80-Year-Olds and Beyond. Welcome, Ronda and Albert.
Thank you. Thank you, Sebastian.
Greetings, Sebastian. Yes, so this is different from some other programs on my radio journal, which I just started maybe a few months ago, because this one is actually an interview of Sebastian, the publisher of this book I wrote about 2 years ago with Albert Hughes called What Now? A Roadmap for 80-Year-Olds and Beyond.
Exactly, and the purpose of this roadmap, as Ronda has so eloquently put it, is to provide Christian insight and inspiration to those 80 years or older. And we put in the description of the book that we hope it will be a help to all people on their 80-plus journey. Now, we didn't mean to neglect the 70-year-olds, the septuagenarians in the group, which is why we have Al with us, because Al is still a septuagenarian, while Ronda is an octogenarian. While we've got both Ronda and Al with us, we'll begin with their telling us their story. So, Ronda and Al, would you tell us something about yourselves? And you can take turns, age before beauty, or whatever rubric you would like to apply to this in order to decide who's going to go first.
Go for it. Go for it, Ronda.
Well, listen, since most people who are listening to this radio journal or any other program on WCAT that it will be, recorded on, know a lot about me, I think you should go ahead first.
Okay, can do. I started adult life as a young second lieutenant. I completed 21 years in the United States Air Force, and about midway through that career in the Air Force, I was an agnostic and began to have mystical experiences, and that's all in another book, Paradise Commander, which I wrote some years ago. But I retired from the Air Force after 21 years and went to Seattle U for a Master of Pastoral Ministry, and then began to teach both Scripture and Catholic tradition. Did that for 25 years. About halfway through that, I studied with the Benedictine Monastery of the Risen Christ at San Luis Obispo, and was issued a diploma in spiritual direction. So that in my elder years is my main thrust, is to help people as a trained spiritual director.
Yes. Now, you've also written a book.
Yeah, as far as my relationship with Ron is concerned, it just happened that we wound up teaching down the hall from each other at a little startup college, got to know each other, and Rhonda was running a little workshop for writers, and she nagged me into finally writing something, and which I did reluctantly, and but the little writers group enjoyed it, and as Steinbeck once said when he was asked if he enjoyed writing, Steinbeck replied, "I enjoy having written," and so I kind of felt the same way, and that's how my writing career got kicked off. This book with Ronda is one of three we've written together, and it's my eighth. It's probably her 68th or so, but that's how we get to this point.
Very
well, you wrote a book, Al, if I may ask, called Ice Fog, Spirit Fire, and the Narrow Gate, A Journey to Constant Joy. And that's your life story. Would you like to say anything about that?
Sure. I went through a description, if you will, of what it's like being an agnostic who doesn't really want to be an agnostic, but growing up with a scientific environment and technological environment and working in that area, I was looking for evidence, and that's which I didn't have, and so I've described what it's like to live as an unhappy agnostic, if you will, and then how that all changed abruptly with mystical experiences that led me into the fullness of the Catholic faith, and on to my teaching and the rest of it.
Well, I'll let
certainly. So, Rhonda, tell us a bit about yourself as we try to come up with an understanding of how the two of you came together so well. I know that Al has already said something about how you met, but let's begin with you, Rhonda. Who are you, and what are you as a Catholic philosopher and a Catholic author?
Yes. Well, my background is very different from Al's, except that whereas he was an agnostic, that is someone who isn't sure whether God exists and doesn't think you can know whether God exists or not, I was brought up by militant atheists who are sure there is no God, but it was a Jewish but atheistic background in New York City. So I was this brash New York girl, extremely blunt and loud, and Al is about opposite in that way because he's a real Southern gentleman and refined and speaks carefully and doesn't throw ideas down other people's throats in anger and so forth and so on. But God used my terrible background in so many ways in a positive way because I can write very bluntly and very self-revealingly because I was brought up to do that. In any case, I became a Catholic through philosophy when I was 21 and eventually got married, had children, and became a professor of philosophy, and then a writer, and then a TV presenter, and then a radio presenter. And then finally I became a widow, and I was teaching at this small school where I met Al and his wonderful saintly wife. And I was actually closer to his wife at that time because she was a charismatic prayer leader, and I used to go to her prayer group, and Al was there too. But in any case, he had such interesting stories that I invited him to join my writers group, and he wrote several wonderful books. The first one, Paradise Commander, about his conversion, and then some other books. So now, years later, he's a widower, and I've relocated to Corpus Christi, Texas, and I meet him again, and he's kind of at loose ends, eager to do something very meaningful. And so I say, come to our writers group. Well, very soon we realized that we had a book that we could write together, which is called Escaping Anxiety on the Road to Spiritual Joy. And this is because Al is an expert in spiritual direction, and I was looking for a director, and he could see that my main problem was anxiety. So the whole course of his spiritual direction of me involving anxiety led to this book where we trace, a whole relationship and our actual meetings for spiritual direction, wonderful truths and insights into Christianity that Al had to help me get through a very anxious period of my life. So we wrote that book, and then we wrote another one called Simple Holiness, also published by En Route Books and Media. And so we had finished those two books, and then I used to always say, you know, I wrote a book I've written about 70 books now, and I had written a book when I was just turning 60 called Finding Christ in the Joys and Sufferings of Aging. And it's a very good book. En Route Books now distributes it. You can find it on the web. But I would always be saying, now I wrote that when I was 60. If I was nearing 80, I would write quite a different book. And eventually we came up with the very good idea, why not write a back and forth book with certain questions and each of us writing sections on this. Now, the advantage of it is it's not a scholarly book or a professional book in the area of geriatrics, which means the medical science of the elderly, of treating the elderly. It's more about the kind of things that 80-year-olds actually think about all the time, like where did I succeed, where did I fail, what kind of pain am I terrified of? How did it feel to be left behind by a wife, a husband, a child? Things like that. What our anxieties are, what our limitations are, and bringing this all to bear, to bring Christian wisdom to bear on all of this. But it's a very chatty, easy-to-read book. And so people will like it who, even though they might benefit from a very professional, highly credentialed doctor's book, The Problems of Aging, you would like this book because it would make you think about things that you only just hear without thinking about them, I think.
Right. In fact, I think one of the strengths of the book is the very fact that you and I are so different in our backgrounds and in our professional life that gives us a complementary look from two different directions at the same issues. And I think that together we've pretty well covered the waterfront as to the things that people ought to be aware of as they approach or pass through the early 80s. I was thinking in particular that from about 75 on, it would be very helpful for people to read a book like this, particularly because when things start changing, they will know what it is and not be afraid or think they've got some terrible mental collapse coming, like the periodic loss of the short-term memory, which Rhonda's been talking about for a couple of years, and now I'm I'm trailing her by about 3 years, and now I'm beginning to see some of the same things. But in my own case, by knowing about these things ahead of time, then when it starts to happen, I know exactly what's going on, and I just accommodate it and move on with my life. So I think both because of our difference of backgrounds and the fact that we are slightly separated by about 3 years in age, both of those things have helped in the writing of this book.
Well, what I realized when we started working on it, Al, was that I would never think I would write such a book because I thought that I would never live till 80, and if I did live till 80, I would be a shut-in, and hopefully through marvelous, miraculous graces, I'd be levitating on the ceiling in ecstasy in between just groaning in pain. So I never thought about all these other kinds of problems like where should I live, who should I be with, how should I approach, the limitations, the capabilities, where did I fail, where did I succeed. So one of the first, I think you made the outline in about 5 minutes when we started working on this, and you said one of the first chapter is, what were my dreams for my life? And I had never really thought about this. What were my dreams? Never thought about the fact that in reality, I've never had a single big dream about my life that ever came true. That in every instance, and so at the end of each chapter, we have little sharing questions for the reader. So the reader would be thinking, okay, what will, after they hear my dreams that never came true and Al's dreams and so forth, what were their own dreams? And in what ways, what I finally realized is I got other things than what I dreamed of that were maybe better, but I couldn't have thought of them then. So, for instance, just with that one of dreams, my first dream was that I wanted to be popular when I was a teenager. And I could never be popular because I just didn't fit in at all. But instead of that, I was usually one of the leaders of the out group. There's always an out group. And so the leaders sit around watching the popular ones and making fun of them and so forth. Of course, after I became a Catholic, I realized that wasn't the purpose of life, was to make fun of other people, but it got me through college. And then I wanted to marry a man who would be like St. Francis, and instead God sent me a Jewish atheist, but one who had become an atheist, divorced playboy, who eventually became a very, very good Catholic, but he wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for someone like St. Francis, and so forth. And so I wanted to have 13 children, had lots of miscarriages, had 3 children who didn't miscarry, but I have 8 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. So I have a big Catholic family in a sense, but not the way I pictured it. See what I mean? So doing something like that, looking at those dreams, it's very helpful to see how God, the patterns in your life, when you're really retired, you have all this time to just think about those patterns in your life, which you didn't even realize were patterns, like the pattern of having a dream that would never come true.
Yeah, that first chapter reveals also how we could cover the whole issue from such different perspectives. You mentioned in a very funny and energetic, sometimes hilarious way, that all your dreams and how none of them came true. But that rather than that, you wound up as a professor of philosophy and some other experiences that you mentioned. Whereas I didn't really have dreams growing up. I had a lot of idle thoughts about what I might become. So my part of that chapter was to write about indications of who I would actually become. And I think that's very good for a reader to read that as well, because they can start thinking about, well, what were the indications of who I became? What were the early, and did I really follow those leads or not? The bottom line is that we can dream all we want about who we want to be, but God has designed us, if you will, for specific types of work. He designed Ronda to be a thinker and a philosopher. He had designed me to be a leader of and commander or manager of teams of specialists without being a specialist myself. And there were clues early on that was exactly where I would wind up. So the contrast of our two approaches will help a reader, I think, to really dig deeply into their own experiences and better understand their own lives and how their lives unfolded.
Yeah, I find that a thing that bothers me terribly is people having this idea failure is if you didn't make $1 million, or you never got that yacht, or you never had a Cadillac or something, you know. Like, that's so sad, because if the purpose of our lives is to grow in love and in service to others in preparation for an eternity of Christian love, you know, can you imagine at the pearly gates that someone's going to ask, did you finally buy a Cadillac? You know, it's so any moment of love that you gave to your children, because of whom, say, you didn't have the money to buy the Cadillac because you were putting them through school, you know, would be much more important. But we have this, I feel in the faces of people, particularly men, a look of, I'm a failure, and if I get to know them better, it's because of things that absolutely don't matter from a Christian standpoint, but there are all kinds of reasons. So it's important to evaluate those things so that, you know, we're going to confession in preparation for heaven for our real sins, not for the failures that didn't even matter.
Yeah, you know, that next chapter was about our successes, if I remember right, and you pointed out that the successes shouldn't really be measured as against how much money did you make or how many people did you manage, or, you know, that sort of issue. But as you said, on our lives should be measured by our accomplishments in the help of others. And the example you used was the one where you wrote that about a certain woman that she was never known hardly ever known outside of her village. She didn't write books. She didn't make a lot of money, but she was the mother of Jesus.
Oh, yeah, that's a thing. You know, that's a famous saying on holy cards. Yes.
Right.
It's very important. So, what is the main? We have very little time, so I want to just cut ahead. We have a chapter on probably the thing that people worry about the most as they head toward their 80s is the pain that they already have and the fear of worse pain. And I find that it's very, very important for Christians to encourage each other on this. There's a little kind of joking gimmick I use to help people with this, because when you're experiencing a lot of pain, you can get to, or worried about pain in the future, you can have this feeling, if God loved me, I wouldn't have this pain and all that kind of thing. Then you begin to doubt whether God exists at all. And I find it helps me, the way I put it is nowadays, is do the math. If you had 100 years on earth and every single one you were being tortured the way Jesus was during the Passion, if you have an infinite time of joy with God in heaven, infinite amount of years, never ending, infinite joy in union with God in heaven, which is what Jesus promises us if we follow him with love, do the math. It's got to be worth it. You know, so that's certainly the voice of the evil spirit to tell you, well, if God loved you, you wouldn't be experiencing all this pain. He would take it away from you. Well, he didn't take it away from Jesus, right? And he certainly, God the Father certainly loved Jesus. Well, maybe you could tell them a little bit about your heart attack and what you went through with that.
Okay, sure. When I looked at the manuscript that Ronda had written, I said, well, I really can't write about that because I really, I've been totally well for 12 years, pains are not an issue to me at all because I don't have any, But when I got to thinking about it, what I did was to come up with strategies, if you will, for the avoidance of pain or for the diminution of pains when they occur. But there's also the point that as people approach and pass through their 80s, not to assume that you will have any terrible pains. And that's where Rhonda asked me to mention. Actually, I didn't have a heart attack, but it was within minutes when they caught it, and so I had a very quick quad bypass, which solved the problem. But the point being that when I came out of the anesthetic, there was this nurse standing there with a glass of water and 2 pills, and I said, I was barely awake, and I said, well, what's that? She says, the pain pills, you're going to need them. And I said, I don't want them. And we had a big argument there. I was still half conscious, and we had one heck of an argument. She went away in a huff saying I was going to be sorry. I never had any pain at all. I mean, this was open chest surgery, and 9 days later I was out of there and never had a pain at all. So I don't think people should presume that, though they should be aware of the possibility, not presume that they're going to have any terrible, terrible pains in their last years. It just may not happen at all. I have 2 friends. I play bridge mostly with people in their 80s and 90s, and one of them is a World War II fighter pilot. He's now 98. And he's just about as sharp and quick as I am at 78. And so, you just can't assume how your life is going to end, whether you'll have these terrible situations or not. I mean, he's very quick, and his wife is now 92, and she's vivacious and just a terrific gal. You'd think she was in her 20s the way she behaves. Anyway, so don't presume, but it'd be good to know some simple strategies for reducing the effect of pains if they do occur, and that's what I tried to tackle in my part of that chapter.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea of other chapters, which we're not going to talk about now, but if you get hold of the book, which we hope you will, either for yourself or it would be a wonderful gift book for any older relatives that you have or older friends. It would be a wonderful gift book for them. So some of the other chapters are about left behind by loved person going first, and Al took care of his wife who was dying of Alzheimer's for many years, and he has very important things to say about that. And my son committed suicide, so I talk about that, coming to grips with the loss of him, and the hope of being together forever in eternity. It's so important that we develop our spiritual life much, much more toward the end, because then we won't feel so grieved by, what may be temporary losses, assuming that we help pray the people we love into purgatory eventually, or heaven, heaven eventually and purgatory on the way for most people. We have a chapter on being ignored by younger adults, where you have to realize if you were in a leadership position that your family doesn't regard you as their head who they have to obey, and so forth. and anxieties about younger adults who won't obey our advice, and anxiety about living situations. And here again, I think Al is correct. You can't predict how that's going to go. I was sitting with my daughter and son-in-law at a dining table, and casually, my daughter said to me, you know, if you're ever totally disabled, we'll take care of you. And so I said very spontaneously, looking at my son-in-law, I said, you can't say that, Carla, because your husband can't stand me. He's not going to take care of me someday. And he looked at me, he's a very witty man, and he said, oh, but Rhonda, when you're decrepit and old and vulnerable, you'll be easier to live with. And it's now a big family joke, but the fact remains that, see, people treat you differently when you're vulnerable, especially if you're a kind of leader type like teachers are and managers. They treat you very differently when you're vulnerable. And so this is a good preparation for eternity, where we will be vulnerably receiving grace. We won't be meriting grace in eternity. So that's some little, there you see some little snippets to give you a taste for what we were trying to do in this book. And an older man who read it thought that it was a wonderful mixture of spiritual and practical wisdom. And he got a lot out of it, and other people are getting a lot out of it too. So do you have a last closing remark, Al or Dr. Sebastian, the publisher?
Well, I'd like to bring up one more point, which is the way we finished the book. Last chapter, last half, which I wrote. I want to. That was addressed to people who are not so sure that there is a God. We've been fed year after year the false dilemma that we can either have faith or reason. And people should know that that's a false dilemma. You can have both. And in fact, the very latest from the science of astrophysics is now finding scientific proofs of the existence of God without reference to theology at all. So I gave a very brief description of what those proofs are, with references to far more detailed books that have been written on the subject. But it turns out that the most leading astrophysicists in the country and geneticists as well are now saying that there's absolute proof that there has to be a designing, creating, and sustaining agent. That's the way they put it. And, of course, that's exactly what we also call God. So those who have doubt should read the book and, for sure, pay attention to the last half of that last chapter and go and find the references that I've mentioned.
Very good.
God is, and never fear.
Okay, maybe Dr. Sebastian, our publisher, would like to have a closing word or closing prayer.
Well, I do have a closing thought, and that is, as I'm listening to your talk, it occurs to me that your book has a lot to say to my generation. My generation is Generation X, and your generation is the quiet generation. And my son's generation, we skipped the millennials. He is Gen Z, they call it. And, in fact, he is about 20 feet away from me working out and building his muscles because he is planning an incredible 60 or 70 years ahead. He just turned 15. Of life filled with all kinds of promise and expectations of the kind that you mentioned. So when you get to the end, you look back and you say, okay, what did I do? So I had a couple of thoughts. One, my own father discovered very early on, even though he died at age 56, he was wise beyond his years. He said every year he would examine his New Year's resolutions and see where he failed, until he got the idea, roughly around age 40, that what he needed to do was wait until December 31st and then count up all of his successes, and then those became his New Year's resolutions for the preceding year. That enabled him to enter January 1st with a clean slate, and then he would live the next 364 days and simply talk about what he had been able to accomplish rather than plan for those things that he knew he would be failing at 364 days later, except on leap years where he had 365 days to fail, which
pragmatist. There's a true
which he considered absolutely. But as you're saying, what can I, sitting here in Generation X, having just turned 48, what can I do now to prepare me for your book, which I will end up picking up again, if I remember it's still on my shelf, 32 years from now when I turn 80? What does that book say to me, who may have parents in that age bracket? What do you think?
I would say it would tell you try to exhibit now the values that will bring you to heaven.
Which is the measure of true success, hey?
Well, I say if you can make it to a place where you can grow eternally in the mind of God, then you've accomplished your goal.
If you think of the thief who died next to Jesus, what a failure of a life. He was a thief, and thieves then were murderers as well. So he was a thief and a murderer, and he failed. He was caught. And what could be a bigger failure? And he met Jesus, and in 1 minute, by repenting, he was able to follow Jesus and reach heaven.
That's the true example and illustration of the word serendipity. That guy is the luckiest guy on the planet. You know, the very first saint.
Well, I mean,
so not all of us can be that lucky.
No, I mean, there must have been something in his heart that was yearning for who Jesus really was, that could receive that love, even from a man dying on a crucifix next to him. Is you know.
And to want to receive it, to be open to the grace that God was freely willing to provide, and that was actually pouring on him in spades. You know, God dumps oceans of mercy and grace on us at every instant, and most of us prefer to carry around umbrellas because we got to be me.
Well, that's a great image, Sebastian.
I just came up with that.
You did. You did. Well, you've got to write a trilogy with us. The next book should be a trialogue between the three of us. How's that?
I think that's a beautiful idea. We'll call it Spanning the Generations, because, you know, Al's a young man compared to you, Rhonda. He's
of course,
he's in his 70s, and you're at the august age of 80-ish.
Yeah. Okay, well...
I think we've just proved what Rhonda has told me over and over again. Every time I say, well, I've done my last book, she says, no, she says, all authors say that, but they always wind up writing another one anyway. So.
Well,
Rhonda's got almost as many books as she has years. So God bless you, Rhonda, for the inspiration that you are to all of us to pursue similar goals.
Amen.
Amen. And
Jesus,
thank you for your time, Sebastian.
Well, with that, we'll say a quick prayer. Rhonda, thank you very much for all of the wisdom that you've given us. in particular to En route Books and Media, because our inventory of books would be greatly impoverished if it weren't for the several dozen that you've provided us in your time with us. So thank you for that, and for helping start so many wonderful things in the life of Al Hughes, in the life of En route Books and Media, a company that you co-founded, in WCAT Radio, a radio station that you founded with me and with Bob Olson. All these wonderful things that occurred while you were in or near your 80s. And this isn't including all those wonderful things that occurred in the several decades prior to all of this. So you are a true blessing. Rhonda, thank you for who you are, and thank God for who you are and for who you are to us. With that may be enough of a prayer. In Christ's name we pray. May we continue to delight in one another's company for all eternity. Amen.
Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.